My name's Kyle Weise and you're watching me on Run Forest Run TV.
Am I dreaming? No, I'm living in my dream.
Hi, my name's Kyle Weise. I'm 29. I'm from the Gold Coast here in Queensland, Australia. I'm an endurance runner, physiotherapist and running coach, and I just recently won the GC30. So my running journey for me probably doesn't start the normal kind of traditional way that a lot of runners do. I kind of grew up playing a lot of team sports. I played a lot of rugby league kind of in my younger years through school, and then running kind of for me was something that I didn't overly enjoy. You know, the thought of running a couple of laps around the footy field to warm up was not enjoyable for me. So played a lot of sport when I was younger, and then when I was in year 12 at school, my girlfriend and now wife was doing the 48-kilometre Kokoda challenge, and she said, "Oh, you should jump in and have a go at that because you guys should be able to do that." And I thought, being 17-year-old me, I thought, yeah, I'll be able to do that. So that year we kind of jumped in and did the 48-kilometre Kokoda challenge here on the Gold Coast, and we hadn't really done too much training for it, just a few hikes. And I remember that day we were out there for about 10 hours. And I remember finishing and going, that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I wonder if I could have gone longer. And then I reckon at that point, I wasn't doing any running, and we finished school that year, and my wife bought me a GPS running watch for Christmas the year we finished school, and she just thought, you said you did Kokoda and enjoyed it, you might do a little bit of running. And I took it out for a run. That would have been Boxing Day 2012. I think I just did about half an hour just down near the Broadwater here on the coast, and I remember finishing and going, that was pretty good. I enjoyed that. And then from there I was kind of hooked. And I think for me, that first year of running, it was a bit sporadic. I'd only run a couple of times a week, and the thought was always, I wonder how long I could run for. That's kind of what got me into it. And when I played a lot of team sport when I was younger, it used to kind of frustrate me that I could put in 100% effort, and kind of the result was determined on how everyone else would perform and how much effort they put in. And then I remember saying to my mum when I was probably 16, I wish I'd picked a sport where it was just on me, I didn't have to rely on anyone else. So I think I got a lot of good positive playing team sports when I was younger, and then I started running, and within probably 6 months I went, I think this is it. This is exactly it. Whatever effort I put into this, I'm going to get the result out the other side. And then pretty much in my first year, I probably only ran maybe 1,000 kilometres the first year I ran. I jumped in a few races off no training and just threw myself in the deep end. And then I reckon the end of that first year I thought, right, I'm going to try and take this a little bit more seriously. And I was probably running maybe 50 or 60 kilometres a week, and I thought, I reckon I can run an ultra marathon. I'll do another one of those. So I signed up for my first ultra. I was 19 at the time, and I did what was the North Face 50 down in the Blue Mountains in May that year, and then finished that race and thought, I reckon I could go longer. I might do 100k in a few weeks. And then I thought, that can't be that hard. I've just got to, jog around for the day. I don't even have to run fast. So I signed up for the Gold Coast 100 here on the Gold Coast, we ran from Burleigh to North Kira and back 4 times. And I was 19 at the time, and Ian Cornelius, who organised those races, used to be quite involved with the Australian Ultra Runners Association, and I knew there was an Australian under 20 age group record, and I thought, I reckon I could get that. And went out and found out how hard it is to run 100 kilometres that day, and I finished, I think I was about 9 hours 49, I think, which I got that record, and I was hooked after that. I thought, the first half of that went so well, second half not so well. And then for me it was pretty much, I was hooked on that sport, and I kind of went straight into these, probably looking back in hindsight, silly long races for a teenager to be running, but kind of jumped in and was racing 50Ks and 100Ks for years. And in those first few years probably ticked off, I think, 20-25 ultra marathons in my early 20s. And I was hooked, so I was mainly running on the trails and whatnot, and I obviously ran a bit on the road and had an idea of that scene and whatnot, but just was loving it. And that kind of coincided with the time I was studying exercise science, so I went through and did my Bachelor of Exercise Science, and I actually picked that degree just before I started running, so that kind of worked hand in hand really, really nicely. So I was kind of starting to get on this journey of running and learn about it, at the same time studying exercise physiology at university kind of went hand in hand really well. So that was a nice little kind of helped me a little bit learn, just obviously studying at university. And I reckon after a few years of just making all the mistakes of what not to do when you're running, I started to kind of get a pretty good idea of how to do well in these real endurance types races, and that was more just for me making all the mistakes myself. And then from there I kind of started to take things a bit more seriously and had my eyes on some kind of bigger ultras, and I was still very much in the trail ultra marathon scene in those years. And I had the big goal for me, my first kind of, big running goal that I aimed for was to try and get the Australian under 25 100k record. and I knew I only had a couple of years to do it, had a few failed attempts, and then basically kind of took training a bit more seriously. And then it was my last attempt. It would have been October, about 5 years ago, nearly today. I went down to Victoria and had a run kind of at the Ned Kelly Chase down there. And yeah, that race went really well. I remember we started at 4 a.m. There was only a few of us on the start line, and kind of just the kilometers were ticking over really easily. And again, the race got really tough, but finished that and ran 7 hours 53, which got the Australian, I've still got it at the moment, Australian under 2500k record. And that was the first time I reckon I'd really set like a big goal for myself and went, right, I'm gonna work towards this. And that was kind of my last shot, because it was going to be summer and then I was going to turn 25, so I couldn't get it. So that was a nice day where I felt like I could kind of deliver under pressure a little bit. So that was kind of like the early part of my running journey, and that was around the time that I was studying physiotherapy at the same time. So kind of that's when I really started to be able to get in tune with my body and how to get the most out of it. I had kind of the background in the exercise physiology stuff at university, and then obviously the physiotherapy point of view, plus having made all the mistakes, I kind of got into this position where I went, I feel like I can give this thing a good crack. Like I've got a fair amount of knowledge in a few different areas. And then I kind of went through physiotherapy. I've been a physio for about 7 years now, and I remember in my first year of physio, I saw a lot of runners and just kept seeing everyone coming in kind of making the same mistakes for me, and I was just like, what's everyone doing here? Why does everyone keep doing those things? And thought, it'd be nice if I could get these people before they got in here, like before everyone kind of got injured. I wish I could get a hold of these people. And at that point, my first running coach from over in New Zealand, he had said, if you want to do some coaching with us, like feel free. So I actually started coaching under them, which would have been about 6 years ago at that point as well, and just started working with a lot of kind of endurance athletes, whether it's road marathons, trail ultra marathons. And it was kind of nice to see people at that side of things when it's like, right, I can help them when everything's going well, but I was obviously working as a physio at the same time of kind of seeing them when it's at their worst. So I kind of felt like I was like, right, I feel like I'm seeing runners in kind of all areas of their running journey, so I could get a bit of an appreciation. And yeah, that was really the first kind of, I suppose, my introduction into the whole running scene. That kind of, there's a bunch of years there, but that kind of led me down the pathway of kind of obviously these last few years, and we can get into that. But yeah, kind of set me up to be able to obviously run myself, but to be a coach and obviously be a physio. So for me, kind of with my running journey, I did start off the first few years kind of on my own, just as most people do, just kind of trying to work out how it all works and kind of explore with running and see what I enjoy, what I don't enjoy. And it was only at the point I thought, right, I wanted to start taking this a bit more seriously. And a few good friends of mine had running coaches at the time, and I thought, oh, we should try and get a coach, that might help. And one of my good friends introduced me to Kerry Suter from New Zealand, who he coached me through then my next probably 3, 4, 5 years worth of running. And he was obviously a massive inspiration for me and probably taught me a lot of what I know about running and coaching. So I worked with him for years, and then that kind of transitioned into me just kind of writing my own programs and kind of doing my own thing, and obviously coached under him for a number of years. And then that obviously has transitioned in the last few years to me coming in my own kind of coaching business, which is just here on the Gold Coast. And it kind of naturally kind of just grew. I had a lot of people that would just kind of would come and join me for sessions or whatnot, and it was never an official thing. There was no name or anything, and it just kind of just built and built to the point that the kind of group that I was coaching and writing their plans and things just got to a point where I went, right, I need to probably actually make this an official thing. And I thought, if this is naturally growing to this point with me not trying at all to do this, then I must be onto a bit of a winner here. So it was only in the last kind of 12 months that I made it an official kind of group, and obviously just gave it the name Kyle's Run Coaching. And I kind of started that and just made an Instagram page, and it's just kind of just continued to build and build. And again, it's been nice to have something where everyone's kind of coming to me looking for that, rather than me having to go out there and try and find people. It's all just been pure kind of organic growth, which has been really good. So we've built a pretty good team kind of where we train in person in Main Beach with a lot of runners, but then I've got a lot of runners that I coach remotely as well. But I love doing it. Like I've got a real passion for the coaching side of things, and even though I'm relatively young in the coaching space, I feel like I've been around for over a decade in running now, and the combination of obviously having a degree in exercise science and working as a physio the last 7 years, I'm pretty much just talking to or working with runners all day, every day. So you build up some pretty good experience and knowledge over the years of doing it, and yeah, I absolutely love doing it. So after I got that kind of 100k record, it was one of those kind of, it had built up to this build up, and I got the kind of goal that I achieved, and I thought, right, what am I going to do next? So that was the end of 2019 that happened, and at that point I went, right, I'm back in the trail ultras, and I'm going to go down this pathway. And I'd signed up to do the Tarawera 100K. That was for the 4th time at the start of 2020, and I had the big goal over there of like, right, I want to break 10 hours for that 102K trail race, and I'd run 10:04 the year before and thought, right, I want to go and do that, and I went over there and managed to run 9:58. And I think I had about 1:20 spare over about 10-hour race. So it was a close finish, but again, I finished and went, right, I've ticked that goal off, and I thought, what next? And at that point, I'd started to, look around abroad of what races do I want to do, and I'd managed to get an entry for the Comrades Ultramarathon in South Africa, which is a really famous kind of road ultramarathon. It's about 89 kilometres. It alternates between an up year and a down year, and I thought, that's just a bucket list race for me. I'd heard all the stories and, read all the history. It's been going for over 100 years, or about 100 years now. And that was the start of 2020. So flights were booked, everything was sorted, kind of just started the training block. And then COVID hit, obviously, as people will be aware, kind of the start of 2020. So the world shut down, that trip got cancelled, and I went, right, okay, well, I had all these big plans of where I was going in the trail and ultra world, and that's all kind of been stopped. And at that point, we could only train with one other person, and you couldn't train in the big groups. And I thought, right, I'm just going to have a bit of a down period here and get into some running, and I might just do some kind of shorter road sessions and things at the moment, given there's not too much else to train for. And I started just doing a lot more kind of just speed sessions and road sessions. I thought, I'll take this as an opportunity to work on the shorter stuff of my speed, given I'd been purely focused on 50K, 100K, like really long races at that point. And I paced the Gold Coast Marathon in 2019 as well, the 3-hour group, which is an amazing experience. And I managed to get that gig having not run a marathon. So I don't know how I managed to get that gig, but I paced the 3-hour group and loved that day in 2019 and thought, all right, maybe I'll switch to the roads a little bit. I'd been doing some shorter things, and at that point, I think I'd run a few little self-timed trials and set a few PBs and 5K and 10K, and thought, I might just follow this pathway. And then obviously just through COVID, travel wasn't an option, so there was no way to I wasn't going to go to these big trail ones, and just kind of focused on more like, I'm going to do the shorter road stuff. And that kind of just naturally transitioned me into probably where I've been for the last 4 years, which has been focusing more on kind of road marathons, half marathons, even a couple of races on the track. And I've kind of shifted focus a little bit. So I felt like I had this good base of just kind of endurance running and strength and volume from being in the hills all the time to transition back onto the roads. And that was at the same time that the group started to build in Main Beach, because that's where that all started. There was just a couple of us to start, and it just naturally built. And that was obviously motivating. So we had people like Rinny, who I coached for the last few years, and she was there, and it's very motivating. And then we had more, that group of, originally it was myself, Luke Kilborn, who I trained with a lot, and Rinny. It was just the 3 of us, and that group naturally built, and they were very much more keen on the road side of things. So I thought, well, if they're training for that and I was coaching them, I'll start following kind of what they're doing and jump into some similar races. And that was when I went, right, I'm going to try and run a fast marathon. Like we'll go down that pathway of trying to run a good one, and picked, funnily enough, Canberra Marathon as my first marathon, which was an interesting choice. It was just, that was the first one in the year that we thought we would do, and I thought I'll jump down and we'll go to that one. And the plan was to kind of try and run around low 230s. Like, again, hadn't raced a marathon, so you don't want to go in kind of overdoing it, and had some good learning experiences out of Canberra of how to race, what it should feel like. And I ran 2:34. That was my first marathon, which I was really happy with. And then, it's kind of just built from there. I felt like I've been very much a lot more structured, disciplined. I've been slowly kind of just building my volume. I've been relatively cautious, which will sound funny given I do run a decent amount of kilometers, but I've been cautious in my build of my running over the years. I kind of had the plan of, I kind of wanted my stock standard training week to basically try and increase by roughly 5 kilometers a week per year, which I've been doing over the last 6 or 7 years. So it's kind of, I'd always had this kind of like, 10, 15 year plan of what I wanted to do with my training and how that was going to build. So I've just been slowly chipping away at that. And obviously the more I've been able to do that, I've built a lot more resilience in my body. And the good bit for me is I haven't had to miss a training session from injury in about 7 years now. So I haven't missed anything. I've trained without down periods most of the year since then. And I've been able to just build good volume of training, and obviously the results and times have just kind of followed. So I think for me it's enjoyable seeing that, but I've also still kind of got like big long-term goals of what I'd love to do in running. So for me, it's just kind of stepping stone goals along the way. So I'll kind of enjoy the things that I'm doing at the moment, but at the same time know where I want that to get to over the next, let's say, decade or so. So it's, I'll enjoy these times while they're here at the moment. Things like, obviously, like we said, getting the win at GC30 is always really nice. But for me, it's just kind of that consistency in the long term. And, it very much depends who shows up, these results, and the times will happen, but the goal is almost to look back on this stuff in 5 or 10 years and go, I remember when I was happy with those times back then, look what I'm running now. So for me it's kind of those real long-term goals I've always been quite focused on, and I think the biggest thing for me is I've just got to be patient. And I think that's probably the number one attribute in a runner, if you had to ask me what's useful, is to be patient. And that might not be just patient for, the next 6 months, but for me it was like, right, I'm going to be patient and steady over the next decade of kind of training. And I feel like I've done that reasonably well kind of so far. I've tried not to get carried away in the hype of running massive weeks of volume and doing anything silly. So hopefully kind of the results are a testament to that, and I can keep being consistent. But yeah, the results recently, I've got to Gold Coast Marathon this year. Well, last year I ran 2:32:53, let's say, around that, 2:32:50, and I was really happy with that. And then I went over to Berlin Marathon last year, which was my first major, and had a very similar race to how Gold Coast went, and I crossed the line and thought, I don't know, I think I missed my PB by a second or two there. And it wasn't until I got back to my phone and actually had to check the Gold Coast results to work out what time I'd run, and I'd actually got a 1 second PB, and I went, okay, well that's better than missing it by a second. So that kept my streak alive of having PB'd every marathon. So that was my third one, and then obviously third PB. And then Gold Coast this year ran probably a much smarter race. I actually went slower through halfway than I'd run in any of my other marathons, and finished a lot stronger and ran 2:31:46, which was just over a minute PB. So I've kept my streak alive of PBing every marathon so far. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, and just kind of getting back into training and building. But yeah, just loving it. So a kind of typical training for week for myself, and obviously that flows in generally to the athletes I coach, to me, is I'll generally kind of start the week off. For me, kind of the long run's generally the key run of the week. So we'll kind of put that on a day depending on the person, what works. So for me, that ends up being on a Sunday. So that's kind of, for me, kind of what I base everything around. For me, Sunday's the key long run. So right, and then Monday will be a relatively easy kind of rest day. I've got a group that I take out onto the trails through my work as a physio every Monday morning, and we just kind of jog around for an hour and then go and have a coffee together. So it's just a leisurely kind of social chat, very, very comfortable, kind of just nice start to the week for me. And then depending where I'm at in the block, I may run again on a Monday, or I'll just take that as rest. Tuesday tends to be one of our speed sessions, so we'll do some type of interval fartlek type of run depending on where everyone is in their training block. And we normally do that down at Main Beach, relatively early start for most of us, given we've got families and work and life to deal with. So we'll do that on a Tuesday morning. Wednesday we'll tend to do a kind of midweek medium run, and again the length of that will very much depend on where we are in our training block. We tend to try to get out through a few little hills around kind of like Ashmore, Benoa area. We normally still start at Main Beach with the group. Thursday's another just easy day. Again, that'll either be just an easy jog, or it could potentially be a rest day depending on where we are on the block. Fridays and probably the key session of the week, we'll do a bit more kind of threshold work, or that'll be a marathon session. Again, very much depends on where we're at. So Tuesday, Thursday tend to be our more intense days. Saturday will either be rest if needed, or it'll just be an easy jog. Again, just depends on what the rest of the week looks like and kind of how my body's feeling. And I've very much been kind of, for myself, I'll take the rest whenever I need it, rather than necessarily scheduling it in on days. If I wake up and just go, today's a rest day, I'm not running today, then I'll take that when I need to, and I'll more restructure around that. So I'm pretty big on people kind of listening to their body, and I'd always advocate for my athletes that if they wake up and just go, I'm feeling rubbish, I need to just rest today, then take it and we'll rework everything else, rather than, no, the rest day is tomorrow, so we need to push through today. I think if you do listen to your body and have a bit of flexibility with what you're doing in training, that gets you that consistency long term. I think sometimes as runners we get a bit too kind of structured and particular about training blocks, and we can't miss a session, and eventually that catches up with you, and it doesn't end well. So that'll kind of be how I structure my rest weeks, and then obviously get to Sunday with the long run, which will either be just a continuous kind of comfortable run along the coast, or we'll run a few hills, or if it's a few times in a marathon block, we might do a big marathon session on a Sunday, just because we've got a bit more time and we can get drinks out and practice all of that. But that's a pretty standard week for me, and there'll just be variations on that depending what I'm training for, or where we are in the year. But I've followed that structure for quite a while, and played with a few different things with that. But that's probably how I would generally think of a training week for me. So I try to spread out the intensity and obviously the long runs, and then everything else around that's just kind of listening to your body, depends on how it's feeling, and getting whatever else other running we can around that. And then if I can just tick that off majority of the year in, year out, then that's how you get the results. So for me, when it comes to kind of structuring my week, obviously that's just the running side of things as well, but there's some kind of key components to the training block that I think are obviously important. And for me, if I kind of look at it kind of what do I want the athlete to be able to do to kind of keep themselves training, there's a few kind of key things that I'll want them to be doing. One of them is going to be generally a bit of strength training, and this probably more comes from me around my physio background of I get to, I don't know if I'd say fortunately or unfortunately, see a lot of injured runners. So you kind of get to learn all the things that they're not doing, and then you'll find that there's certain things that you actually get most runners to have to work on to reduce their risk of injury. So it becomes quite easy to work out what type of strength exercises and things are quite useful to be good at for a runner, that I'll often not only kind of work on myself and make sure my numbers are stacking up to where they need to be, but also then when I screen a lot of runners in the clinic, you kind of know roughly what you want people to be looking like to know that they're less likely to get injured. It doesn't mean you can't get injured, you can't prevent them, but we can reduce the risk a bit. So that kind of strength training or making sure strength's where it needs to be for runners is super important, and I kind of see the downside of that day in, day out in the clinic. And then for me, when it comes to kind of my training as far as kind of like run mileage and things, is often another thing people like talking about. For me, I'll kind of have, like, as I said before, just like a stock standard week of what a training week would look like. And for me, that's just been gradually building into the point now where if I have a full week of training, I might end up averaging anywhere from, let's say, 110 to 115, 120 kilometers in that range for a typical week. And I'll tend to peak that a little bit higher throughout a block leading to a marathon. I think last year for Gold Coast, I got a couple of weeks of about 140 kilometers in the week, which that's the most I've ever run in the week. So there's obviously a lot of marathon runners out there at the high levels that run a lot more than that as well. But I've kind of found for me that's a good kind of level of volume where I don't often really pull up sore at all. I don't really feel like I'm training that much, and if I just slowly build to it, everything feels quite good. And then for me, I think when I talk to a lot of runners, and if I'm doing like the seminars and things that we do from the physio point of view, I often say that the key things to being a better runner is you need to be able to keep running. Like, you need to avoid not running. There's no key like 6-week training block or session that's going to make you amazing. You just need to be able to train week in, week out. And we know in the kind of the research that generally for any athlete in most sports, if you can get through about 80% of your yearly volume or what's prescribed what you need to do, you're generally going to hit your goals. So for me, it's like, right, what do I need to do to make sure I'm keep training? And for me, it's listening to my body and getting the rest that I need when it's needed. Sleep as much as you possibly can. Eat enough. And I think that's one thing that often gets overlooked from most athletes, especially endurance athletes, is they don't eat enough. And I think for me, if I look at my last 7 years there's certain things I haven't done very well, but like I said, I don't think I've had an injury that I've missed. 2017 was the last time I missed running from an injury. And if people ask, like, how have you gone that long and not had a single injury? I think the fact that I eat as much as I do is probably the biggest factor in that as well. Like, I've got a 2-year-old at home, so like, yeah, sometimes sleep isn't great around those times. It's as good as we can hope. And same with other, like, recovery and rest, strength training. You kind of do what you can, but often it's not always perfect. But I've always been able to eat a lot, and I almost think that's like my secret weapon, which most people don't talk about. I know for me, when it comes to fueling, and it's the same when I work with the sports dietitians, that if I'm training a training block and I start to see my weight drop a little bit, like, that's a warning sign for me. I'm like, I need to basically ease off or start eating more, not, oh, how good's this, I must be training well, my weight's starting to drop. So for me, like, and this comes from experience working with a lot of runners that have had bone stress injuries and stress fractures, which is a really common thing we see at work. And I would say in pretty much all of the cases, that's the reason why these things happen. So for me, the fueling is a massive side of things. And for me, it's basically, I'm just going to eat as much as I possibly can. I don't follow any specific strict diets or anything. It's just, if I can eat as much food as I possibly can and fuel my body for it, then I'm generally in a good position. And I reckon that's probably been my secret the last 5, 6, 7 years of not missing any running, and I think that's what's let me be consistent, which is obviously how you get the results. So yeah, I think for me, kind of this next, obviously, kind of near future for me is I'm still just looking at kind of just that consistent building for me. I still feel like I've got a lot of progression to go over the next 5 or 10 years. So I think for me, it's about not getting carried away with getting some, PBs and you're running a bit faster. I think a lot of people get carried away with that and then try to do everything in the next 6 to 12 months because they've had a couple of good results, and it's like, right, I need to be at my best, lifetime best next month, not in a few years time. So I've obviously got the luxury of still having a number of good years left in me to kind of see good progression. So for me, it's a lot of much of the same, really. It's nothing too exciting. I probably will still run another marathon or 2 next year. I'm probably going to jump back on the trails potentially later this year and mix it up a little bit and do some different things, nothing too long. And then, yeah, I suppose for me, this next 5 or 10 years is still, I do want to run a fast marathon. Not that I don't think 2:31's slow, but I would like to try and run faster with that. I think I've still got room to go with that. And I've even just felt, even the last 12 months, that little bit extra volume, how much stronger I felt running those endurance races has been quite eye-opening to see and just exciting for this next 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years for me of progression. So I think for me it's still that consistency and kind of patience with it, and knowing that if I am patient over a long period of time, like those results are going to come. So I probably see myself doing marathon stuff for the next few years, or focusing on that as the main kind of aims. I think I'll generally always then go back to the trails, kind of where I started eventually. I think there's some big ultra marathons on the trails that are on my bucket list that are just kind of big lifetime goals that I want to tick off. But the benefit of the long stuff is you've got a lot longer to be able to train for them, and there's guys and girls winning races well into their 40s and early 50s in these big ultra marathons. So I'm not in a rush to be back trying to do as well as I can in the big races. Again, I'm well aware that I've got a lot of time to keep kind of progressing, and if I can just consistently be running for the next 5-10 years like I have the last 5, 6, 7 years, then that's kind of the goal for me. And one of the things I did when I started running is, and I don't know where this came from, but I'm very much a numbers person and like the numbers and the stats, and I stumbled across this website called the 100K Club, which is a group of runners that have run 100,000 miles in their life. And this was in the first year of my running, and I thought, I'm going to get on that page. And I set this goal when I would have been 19 or 20, and thought, I'm going to run 100,000 miles in my life. And it's been this nice goal of like, that's obviously decades away for me, but every run that I do, whether it's the shortest run or I feel rubbish, I'm always ticking off to that goal. I think that's something that's always just been like just that light at the end of the tunnel of like, if I can get there, if I could actually be consistent enough that I can run 161,000 kilometers in my life, like I've done a lot of good things. So I'm at about 45,000 Ks at the moment. It's 4 laps around the world, and I'm on my second lap at the moment. So I've kind of got these, that's my, if you want to know, my big long-term goal is sometime in the next few decades, I want to tick off and get on that website as having run 100,000 miles in my life. And yeah, it keeps me going. Obviously there's time goals along the way are a nice kind of bonus, but like I said, I just want to keep enjoying my running, and I'll get there eventually. So some of my bucket list races generally are all going to revolve around the trail and ultra marathons, just because for me, kind of trail and ultra is like the things you get to see on these races, and the terrain you get to traverse and the sights you see are just, there's nothing like it. Kind of when I do the road races, and I enjoy the road races, and that's generally going to be about kind of trying to run times for me and kind of run PBs, so to speak. Not that it's all about that, but that motivates me quite a bit. But for me, races like the UTMB that starts in Chamonix in France and traverses a lap of Mont Blanc, it's 170 kilometers with just over 10,000 meters of elevation gain. So it's a big race that's always been on my bucket list. Same as the Western States 100-mile race, which was the first 100-mile trail race, absolutely on my bucket list. And then the couple other ones that I've always wanted to do there's one called the Hard Rock 100, which is a really high altitude, high elevation gain mountain race in America. That would be a very tough one to do, but I'll tick it off at some point. Other than that, Comrades, which I spoke about earlier, that's something that I would just, bucket list item. It's the biggest road ultra marathon in the world, so to run with that many thousand people in an ultra would be pretty spectacular. The only other ones that are kind of real long-term bucket list for me is a race called the Tahoe 200, which is a 200-mile race on trails that traverses a full lap of Lake Tahoe over in the United States. And that's something I remember I looked at and went, what a cool idea for a race to actually be able to like traverse a lake that big. And I think races like that, whether it's running from one town to the next, or kind of traversing a certain kind of, whether it's mountain range or lake or something like that, they kind of appeal to me because you feel like you're actually achieving something rather than just doing a race to kind of go out and backs for the sake of hitting a certain distance. So there's some races like that I thought I've just got to tick them off at some point, whether I'm racing them or doing them as a bit of a bucket list adventure just to kind of tick them off. But those real long kind of trail ultra marathons to, like I said at the start, kind of test how long I can go for, I feel like that'll answer that question for me eventually if I start getting to those ones. Yeah, I think for me kind of having that support network in a sport like this is really, really important, because as we know, it can be a very isolating sport. It's a very individual sport, and I think growing up playing a lot of team sports, I really enjoyed that team environment, kind of feeling like you're working for other people and kind of they're there doing the same thing and you're in it together a little bit. So I've always enjoyed kind of when I do my running stuff, kind of having people to run with and the group run side of things. And I think I really realized that obviously during COVID, where I did a lot of it by myself, and it was nice to do that at times, but I thought, it's nice when I've got people around me. So obviously there's a support network of kind of the people in my own personal life that kind of let this happen. So like my wife, who is very accommodating with my training, I'm getting up at silly hours of the morning pretty much every morning of the week, and obviously we've got a 2-year-old daughter as well, so she can help out with that while I'm kind of training early in the morning. So she's the one that obviously got me into the sport in the first place, and kind of lets me do it and loves crewing for my races and going to all the events events, and we get to go on some pretty cool holidays to these events, which is really cool. So she's been amazing, and probably wouldn't still be running if she hadn't got me into it in the first place. That was why it happened. So she's been a massive support. Obviously, we're very lucky that my mum is retired and loves coming around to hang out with my daughter early in the morning. So when my wife wants to go for a run as well, my mum gets to come around early and look after our daughter when she wakes up, so we can go out and do some of our training. So things like that just make kind of training easy and a bit stress-free for us, which is quite nice. But like for me as well, just having the group that I get to train with, I think there's a lot of times where the alarm goes off at an ungodly hour and it's pitch black and you go, oh, do I have to do that today? And for me, that never gets any easier. I think people assume that you just bounce out of bed and want to do this, and you love getting up every morning. But for me, it's not like that. It's still, every time the alarm goes off, there's that mental thought of, oh, do I have to do this today? But obviously I've got the kind of key group that are there pretty much every morning for me to train with. So knowing that, one, I coach them, so I need to set a good example and make sure I get to training is very, very important. But obviously too, just to have them there knowing that, if they're getting up, I need to get up, and we kind of do that for each other. So you kind of feel like you're going to like team training for me, it's only been in this last year or two that I've really felt like kind of back in my footy days, where it was like you're going to training with the team. So for me, it's very much like, right, I'm going to training now, I'm going to train with the team, versus just I'm going to do my own individual sessions. So I think that's been really, really useful. I think not just for me, but for the rest of them as well. I think it's more of a social outing for us at the same time. We get to go and talk rubbish, as you do when you're doing your training sessions, and have a coffee with each other afterwards. So that kind of group that I've got down there at Main Beach has been obviously massive for me, being consistent and kind of motivating me to keep going. So I think, like I said, being a coach, you kind of want to set the best example for them as well. So you want to be out there, going, well, if I'm going to make them get up and do this session at this hour in the morning, like I'm going to be there next to them doing the same thing. So they help me, I help them. Kind of, we've got that relationship there, and they're an awesome bunch of people. So they're massive motivators for me as well. And I think for me, like just in running, like those key people that kind of influence you a little bit. So as I spoke about earlier, like Kerry Suter, who was my first coach, he's massively motivated me as well, and taught me a lot about running kind of to start with, and especially with the coaching side of things. And he had, about a few years ago, had quite a bad mountain bike accident, and he's in a wheelchair now, won't ever get to kind of run again, became a tetraplegic. And that was a real kind of eye-opening moment for me of kind of, oh my goodness, like I need to appreciate being able to get out and go for a run. And I think the next morning after that happened, and we kind of heard the news, this was over in New Zealand, that this had happened, I'd never jumped out of bed so quickly as I did that next morning, just going, the fact that I can get out of bed and just do this, I reckon that was one of the easiest runs I've ever got up for early in the morning. Just kind of gave you this new appreciation that, like, I get to get up and do this. It's not just the running, but I can do this if I want to do it as well. I think sometimes we get caught up in the PBs and the goals and things, and you kind of want to take a step back and go, the fact that I just get to get up and run in some pretty amazing places like we are on the coast, and hang out with like-minded people and go for a run, like that's why we do it. So I think for me, that was obviously having him kind of support me through that, but then that happened to him, and kind of that was a massive change for me to be like, right, I need to just appreciate that I can get out and do this. And I think that's what's helped me kind of keep a level head with running and not get too caught up in it. And I've got those long-term goals, so I'm like, if I have a bad race, like still got to do the race, like it doesn't matter, I can get up the next day and go for another run and go catch up with my friends and go for a jog. So that probably changed my perspective on running a little bit as well. And that was not that there's any really good come out of that situation, but you got to take some positives when those things happen. And I think that's just put me in a good mindset when it comes to kind of training and sport, and obviously my own coaching as well, of kind of making sure people understand that, like, we're lucky to be able to do it, like enjoy doing it. Like, most of us, we're not going to the Olympics, this is not life or death, this is not our job, like we do it as a hobby, like we got to enjoy it a little bit as well. So kind of gave me that nice balance, I suppose, as a coach and as a friend for the people I run with. So that was probably one of the big things that kind of helped me with running, and kind of shaped how I think about the sport, and try, don't get carried away with too many things, and just appreciate the little things that you get to be able to do. But yeah, I think most people have to have that good network around them to be able to make it happen. So yeah, they're definitely the people that kind of keep me going. So for anyone that's kind of watching out there thinking, oh, I definitely want to get into a bit of endurance sport, this sounds really good, and I'm really excited, I've got some friends that do it. There's a few things, I suppose, for me that I've learned over the years that are really important when you're kind of starting out. One is, don't get carried away with copying what everyone else is doing. Generally, you're going to kind of join in and see all these other people doing stuff, and it's really easy to get caught up in that initial kind of hype of it all. You're generally going to go in and do too much. What we always see at work for me is people get into it, they end up getting injured, and they go, oh, it's not for me, and then they kind of just leave and don't do it anymore. And I think running for me is just one of those things that if you can be smart in the early days and just don't overdo it, don't overcommit to races, just jump in and get out there a few times a week and just consistently run and enjoy it. And you can get to the point that you can build enough resilience in your body and fitness that then you can start to build, you'll love it. Like, it's one of those things, I think, if you can be consistent and patient for this first, let's say 12 months of running and not do anything silly, you're going to love the sport and be way better off. I almost feel like when people get into running, they need to do like a 12-month apprenticeship where you're not allowed to enter races, you're not allowed to do anything. You just got to listen to someone who knows what they're talking about and just let them guide you through that introduction into running, because it's such an amazing sport. And if you're smart with it, it can be a lifelong hobby for people as well. So I think most people get into it and the advice is like, right, you're going to pick a race and we're going to try and get this time and build up to this. And I just think if you can get into it and just enjoy it for what it is, and maybe that's just the social side of things first rather than competing in races, that sets you up to then be able to get into the races and be super competitive. So generally I'd say don't get carried away in the early stage, just hold back and be patient, which comes back to patience, which I keep saying. I think that's super, super important. And then really it's a matter of just don't get focused on the little things. People get caught up in the little 1% things, what's the latest shoes or recovery techniques and things, and I wouldn't really worry about any of those things. I think train consistently, don't overdo the speed work, eat lots, sleep lots, and have a good group around you to enjoy it. I think we're going to keep it simple. I think it's not glamorous, all those things. You're not going to make good social media posts about it. People want to hear the latest recovery boots and ice bath techniques and stuff, but at the end of the day, that stuff's not going to matter if you can't run in the first place. So I think just those kind of general principles are by far more important than all the other little things. So start easy, consistent, find a good group to look after you.